Are Canadians getting tired of immigration? A new poll from Leger says a majority of Canadians now think this country is letting in too many people. So let's begin with how Canadians are feeling generally about immigration right now. This country welcomed something like 437,000 immigrants in 2022, plans to welcome 465,000 this year, 500,000 by 2025. Are Canadians supportive of that plan?
To prevent the possibility of being attacked in your home, leave your fobs at your front door. You'd be forgiven for thinking those are the words of a criminal, possibly a mobster or a hitman. But you'd be wrong. Those are, verbatim, the words of a constable with the Toronto Police Department. With a dramatic 400% surge in auto theft and break-ins, the police think Canadians are better off making it easier for criminals to get away with their vehicles than doing the jobs they are paid with taxpayers' money to do. But this increase in crime isn't sporadic. It's one piece of a growing puzzle of problems affecting the Great White North. With a population growth that far exceeds the country's ability to provide for the people within its borders, quality of life has plummeted, which has forced a people perpetually believed to be chronically nice to turn to unbecoming vices. So, it's not surprising that in the last 3 years, the country has gradually unraveled, going from a utopia that attracted millions from around the globe to a deplorable state reminiscent of a third world country. This begs the question, what the heck happened to Canada? If it wasn't already clear, the root cause of Canada's problems is mass immigration. But before we talk about that, let's focus on the people who made it so that the country received people in the hundreds of thousands every other year without fail. Although Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is credited with the radical immigration changes that have since stank up the land of maple syrup, there's evidence that the ball was already rolling long before he entered the scene. You need to go back to the 1970s when Pierre Trudeau, Justin's father, pushed for more liberal immigration rules with the 1971 Multiculturalism Act. Then, in 1988, another bill was pushed to replace it, which more or less turned immigration from just another aspect of the state to Canada's core identity. As a snippet of the 1988 Multiculturalism Act stated, to promote the understanding that multiculturalism is a fundamental characteristic of the Canadian heritage and identity. This idea that Canada was nurturing a Dominic Toretto-esque figure that picked up strays and called everyone family made it such that any views to the contrary became more or less offensive, not just to the Canadian identity and way of life, but to the immigrants as well, who were, by default, minorities. Although this is a step away from his father's idea of the Canadian identity, it doesn't entirely aberrate from the cause, because at the end of the day, it meant Canada didn't know who or what it was, which made it more open-minded to receiving people regardless of class or creed. To be clear, Canada does have an identity, and it's one the world already knows about the kinder, gentler United States. That's why Canada's laws on and perception of immigration are way more lax than those of the US, regardless of who's in charge of their southern neighbors. Trudeau simply ran with this ideology to the maximum, increasing the number of people entering the country every other year. Accounting for foreign students, refugees, temporary foreign workers, illegal immigrants, and legal migrants, Canada currently receives over 1 million new entrants annually. For perspective, it's like building a new Saskatchewan every year and stocking it full of new faces. Trudeau's administration believes that such a massive scale of immigration will help the local economy significantly by fixing labor shortages, filling the gap of skilled labor immigrating elsewhere, and positioning Canada as an attractive destination in the global race for skilled workers. Underlying these motivations is a long-term ambition for Canada to have a more dominant presence in the global consciousness and come out from being the weird cousin hiding in the United States' shadow. Both countries have almost similar landmass, but the US has 8 times the population, 12 times the GDP and is a more attractive prospect for immigrants than Canada. For a country posing as a kinder, gentler United States, Canada hopes to grow into a major competitor by doing what the United States wouldn't do or reluctantly does: accept everyone who breathes. Take it from Yusa George, a professor in Canadian immigration policy at Toronto Metropolitan University. We have lots of space for people to come and occupy. In order to expand our agriculture, industrial, and technological base, we need more people to come here. Suffice it to say that Canada has been largely successful in cornering more of its fair share of immigrants. Anyone not looking to be rejected by the United States picks Canada as the next best thing. However, as the influx of people into the country increased, the results haven't been as expected. Make no mistake, there have been some positives. For example, hiring and consumption have increased within the country, which helped to hedge the economy against a rate hike campaign by the Bank of Canada. However, there have also been some misses, huge misses. For starters, the parts of Canada that could really use the population growth are the rural areas. Increasing community sizes will foster economic growth in rural areas as companies will look to leverage the boom, thereby stimulating the local economy, creating jobs, and urbanizing said areas. But that's not really the case. If Canada's urban areas weren't already breaking at the seams with people moving from rural areas in search of greener pastures, the immigrants also want some part of the economic pie and also go for these urban areas too. There's also the not-so problem of Canada's horrendous housing market, which has only worsened as more people enter the country. This means the population is quickly outpacing the nation's ability to house them. As we all know from Business 101, when demand outpaces supply, commodities become even more expensive. That goes for both renting and buying a house. Worse still, although economic output appears to have improved, the standard of living of Canadians isn't on the upward trajectory. Instead, what has happened is the availability of even cheaper labor has cut the new wealth created by immigration. And when that's not a factor spread across the population, it's barely enough to keep up with inflation and overall cost of living. Also, this economic improvement doesn't mean the local economy has surged by leaps and bounds. No, the GDP per capita has changed very little in the past decade. The experts project a decline from its peak in 2002, and as disposable income continues to pale in comparison to the cost of living, productivity has stagnated. You know that things have gone to hell when the National Bank of Canada decries that the country has fallen into a population trap. But simply, savings are being used to provide infrastructure and capital for immigrants, which has affected the economy more than it has helped. And as more people continue to enter the country, volatile markets like housing and healthcare continue to grow out of reach for the average Canadian. Is it any surprise that even pro-immigration economists have backtracked, calling Canada's immigration too forward, too fast? The repercussions for erecting over 3 million housing units for over 10 million immigrants that have called Canada home in the last 50 years are increasing homelessness, unaffordable housing, and skyrocketing debt. Also, like it or not, immigrants are more likely to work for less pay, which means cheap labor, which ruins the labor market for Canadians, leading to more unemployment and a cycle of wealth inequality. For perspective, wealth equality in Canada has plummeted from the second highest in the world during the early 1960s to the mid-20s. In fact, this decline is unlike any other seen in the developed world. Overpopulation in urban areas has created an 80% surge in housing demands across the country, which still doesn't completely cater to the current or future markets. I say future markets because immigration isn't stopping anytime soon. The majority of the ruling class believes in a 1% immigration policy that will see the nation's population grow annually without fail. That means an exponential increment year on year without regard for the ability of the current systems to deal with continued population growth. So far, mass immigration has little positive in terms of economic impact. Instead, there are more negatives, which look set to grow even worse in the long term. Forget the eye service of continuously swearing commitment to the Kyoto Accord or the near yearly declaration of war on child poverty. Suppose Canada's ruling class continues to add the equivalent of a medium-sized city every half a decade. In that case, they'd only be adding to the working poor and diminishing any hopes for the utopia they believe it could create.